Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Hope you're all having a great time at QED. Great to see so many people here with us today. So, in case anyone got here by accident, this is the panel Video Games as the New Moral Panic. So I am your chair for today. My name is Lana Donaghy. In case anyone hasn't met me yet today, hi. Please say hello to me afterwards, especially if you're coming to talk about video games. So what we're going to do now, if that's okay, guys, is if we can just go down the line and we're just going to introduce ourselves so everyone gets to know us, and then we're going to kick off. That's okay? Brilliant. Right. Should we start at the end?
Good morning, everybody. My name's Asher Webster. I'm a games designer. I've been working in the games industry for about 14, 15 years now. You guys can probably find me on Twitter as Skeptidiot, which will probably tell you all you need to know about my knowledge when it comes to the skeptical side of things. But basically, I've just been working in various different companies and fields, and hopefully be able to put some insight from the industry side for you guys, as much or as little as I might be able to tell you. Hopefully it'll give you some interesting insights into how we view these things and what we're doing to solve these problems and to put to face these things.
Yep. Hi, I'm Steve Novella. I'm a neurologist from Yale and a science communicator and a huge video game addict.
Hi, I'm Alice Lee Woods. I'm a video game journalist and presenter. I'm usually the kind of person you see on BBC Breakfast trying to frantically explain to parents why video games are not going to destroy your children.
They're not?
Gosh, spoiler alert.
Okay, should we just finish the panel now then?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, so the idea for this panel kind of started a few weeks ago. Actually, thanks to you, Steve. Anyone else listen to the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe podcast? just one or two hands then. So episode 676, if you missed it, was Steve covering the addition of video game addiction to the World Health Organization. So this kind of got us thinking about, in this day and age, video games have been around for ages, but we're still talking about how they're bad for us as a society. So we came up with this idea. So now, not to go over the podcast that probably the majority of you have already listened to. If you haven't, do, it's great. Are video games bad for us? And what is it about virtual worlds? Are they more addictive than books or comic books or movies? Steve, do you want to just touch on that?
Yeah, so the concept of addiction itself is a little controversial. Like, you have to define what exactly you mean by that. There are those who are in the where that's their specialty, who think that the word addiction should be limited to a physiological addiction. Like, if there's if you're activating that nucleus accumbens in your brain chemically, that's an addiction. It's a physiological addiction. But the term has been broadened to the point where it's kind of lost its clinical specificity, which is always a problem when terms, their definition becomes vague, because then how do you study it or how do you talk about it if it becomes so broad? And I think the video game quote unquote addiction is probably better looked at as a compulsive behavior disorder, or disorder itself has a specific definition. It has to rise to a certain level where it's actually impairing your life. Right, so there's, compulsive behavior, and then compulsive behavior can become an actual disorder, and those are all those are very similar, like gambling compulsion or whatever it is that you're doing that you think is taking over your life and you shouldn't be doing as much as you are. And video games are no different, than anything else that people can do compulsively.
Okay, so it's more about how it affects your life than any sort of, because the myth you see a lot is that the dopamine of video games is the thing that's addictive, as if anything that we do that...
Yeah, but that's just saying what neurotransmitters activated in your brain. You know what I mean? So everything's a neurotransmitter firing in your brain. Dopamine is the universal reward system neurotransmitter. So everything you do that you enjoy gives you dopamine, right? There's nothing special, again, about video games that does that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So And the other thing that we see again and again in these discussions, I don't know how many of you like watch a lot of daytime TV, maybe it's just me, but is this idea that children are more susceptible to this kind of addiction. Is there any science based in that?
So it's only very preliminary at this point, and nothing where we could draw any kind of conclusion about it. I mean, again, so children are more susceptible to a lot of things. They're immature. Their brains do not function the way adult brains do. Even teenage brains do not function the way adult brains do. And one of the primary differences is that they haven't fully developed their frontal lobes, which is what gives you the ability to inhibit your behavior, your executive function. So anything like that, they don't have the wiring to control their behavior as well as adults. Again, there's nothing special about video games. And again, research looking at it's like, how do you ask the question? If you just say, are video games compulsive? Yeah, sure. Are they more compulsive to children? Well, sure. But so is everything. Is there anything special about video games that makes them more compulsive or addictive than other things? Well, what variables are you controlling for? And at the moment, there's no research that says, yeah, there's something especially compelling or addictive about video games that's different than other similar types of behavior. So again, if you fine tune your question to down to that, there really isn't any data there.
Okay, great. So when we're on the topic of children, now I have a son. He is 8, and he loves video games. You guys might have the same things, and the arguments we see in the media again and again are, won't someone please think of the children? And these calls on on platforms and developers to police children's behavior. So, Ash, if you'd just like to talk about, as a developer yourself, what do you think developers can do to help children, like on these platforms?
Well, I think it's important when you're developing any video game, especially ones that are going to have that aim to draw people in and keep them playing that game for an extended period of time. If it is aimed, particularly when they are appealed to or are aimed specifically at children, looking at something like Fortnite, which obviously has more of a younger appeal than its counterpart, PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, which is more of a realistic experience. You have to offer options for the parents to be able to take control there. Now, whether it's through those parental controls of time limiting, we already have the ERSB who is setting ratings on these games and informing parents of what is appropriate for them and allowing parents to make those decisions. Do I want my child to be playing those? For us, it's really important to be looking at how can we limit a lot of that online interaction, the multiplayer things, whether we allow people to be able to communicate freely or whether we limit that functionality. Because the truth is that they can be playing against anybody in those online arenas. It's really important that I think we ensure that the education is there as part of that, so that it is very clear when you're selling these video games that you're telling people what's in them, what is available as a feature, and what should the parent be aware of. Really, I think it comes into when we start touching on loot boxes and the functionality that you'll find does sort of lean more towards, I guess, as I've been talked to during this, the gambling side of things, which are the real hooks. A standard, when you're building something, you want a video game that's fun. You want people to keep playing it. That is the ultimate line in the sand for us, is first find the fun. So when you're hooking into that, and whether it is through something that might be random chance and the ability to, gain benefits or rewards that will keep people coming back, you have to be really careful that that functionality in there is not touching upon sort of the gambling side of things. We're very much a skill-based experience, whereas gambling is much more of a chance-based experience. When you're hooking that through and say you may be offering loot boxes, it's really important that we look at ways to limit the real world effect of that. So whether it's saying, oh, actually, you can unlock these skins or these rewards in this game, but it is only within the game that they exist. You don't want the ability for somebody to be able to then cash out and sell those on eBay or through the game to other players, because then you're creating an actual real world economy within your game. And I think it's really important when we're doing these things is just to keep in mind that people will always find a way around that kind of stuff. If you look at the most recent ones is CSGO and Dota, where the player skins and the improvements that they offered in there, it was meant to be just within the game, but because they had player trading, and I could send that to one of you guys if I had an interesting skin, entire betting systems popped up where people were trading these to win other ones, and a massive sort of for-profit economy came out of that, which was not something that Valve had expected at all from it, and had to rather quickly shut down. So I think as games developers, we have to be really careful when we're building systems that we make them as enclosed systems within our product, because it is very easy for people to exploit it, whether it's cheats or hacks, or it starts affecting into real world economy and trading of money for these things. That has to be closely monitored and planned when you're on the design stage.
So the conversation that comes up again and again is that developers are deliberately using this. And there's a conspiracy of dopamine-fueled addiction that developers are using to hook our children into things. So just to clarify, you guys don't have some kind of secret cult or
Oh, no,
meetings?
we absolutely do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no. If I could find a way to get you all play my video game, specifically mine, because I want to be the one making the money from it, yeah, absolutely, would love to. But no, there isn't. There is no conspiracy. We're not meeting in secret back rooms with the lizard people to hook all your children on video games and turn their brains to mush. I think it was in something like 2005. I think it was that Senator Clinton at that time, she said that the aggression and the damage being done by video games was comparable to lead poisoning for damage to intelligence, which I thought was quite funny. Last thing you really wanted to do is go down that route of hooking everybody. But yeah, if we could, we'd love to be able to make games that everybody wants to play and they don't want to ever play another game. That's what we're aiming for, I'll be honest, is great. If we could make video games that people are hooked on, and I know using that word might be a little bit contentious, but yeah, that's what we're looking for. You want to make a great game, you want people to be playing that, you want people to be raving about it, you want to tell their friends about it. That's the ultimate thing. That's why we make video games, is because we love people playing them and talking about them and being interested and inspired by them. But we're not there trying to find what is the ultimate way to just turn it into a pure addiction for people. You're just looking to make a fun experience and hope that, at the end of that, you make enough people interested in it that they buy it, that you can keep making them. Because otherwise, we wouldn't have a job. And, I'd probably be stacking shelves, to be honest, because I've not got many other skills apart from video games. That's kind of my entire wheelhouse. But yeah.
Isn't it? Because I think fundamentally what the media are trying to call on developers to do is make games less fun.
Yeah.
Which seems a bit counterintuitive to me.
Well, I also think one of the things that I find quite interesting is that the idea of developers making things addictive is not just a wild conspiracy theory. There is fundamentally technology in place in things like Instagram that has been used at Google, it's been used on Facebook, that has specifically been researched by neurologists, has been researched by psychologists to keep you addicted to those social media platforms. And that's not a crazy conspiracy theory. It is fact. An ex-Google staffer has set up a group which he is using to try and crusade against people doing that in technology. He's saying that they shouldn't be allowed to try and hook us into social media apps. And yet you've probably never heard of that. You probably don't know a lot about him. And so there are industries that do actually do that and have been proven to. Gaming is not one of them. And yet we are the one that is most accused of it. And that's what I find very interesting, is that if that was the case, it would have been discovered. You can very easily look at the source codes of games. You can't hide things in games. People can, run completely through them. I think that's a big issue developers have, is that you cannot hide anything from people. And yet nobody has ever found anything that proves they are deliberately using psychological warfare to trick people into playing. it just so happens that games are fun. And yet it seems to some people who possibly, don't play, that idea is so unbelievable that it has to be some kind of psychological, sneaky trickery instead of just developers doing a very good job of making games people want to play.
I think you hit a great point there, is that the reality is we do look at, what are the psychological tricks, as they are, to interest people. You do want to build a difficulty curve in a game that keeps people coming back. The challenge increases as you work your way through it. And I think it's the same in any game, whether you're playing chess or you're playing sports. You want, there's something in that keeps people coming back to it. And I think, we will look at the psychology of play in games and use that as we can to find interesting ways to keep people engaged with it. But it's not about how can we make sure that people come back every day, and how can we, ensure that nothing else matters to them? That's the last thing you want. You want something that people are engaged with and enjoying, but at the end of the day, it's an entertainment product. You'd never argue that movies use all those psychological hooks that they do. It's the jump scares and the building of tension music. That doesn't make them addictive. It's just that's ways of making the experience engaging from start to finish. At the end of the day, the movie finishes, the game finishes, and you move on. You go do something else.
And it's the same as all marketing.
Yeah.
Marketing is manipulation, right? And they actually do psychological research to know how to better manipulate you into buying products. Again, video games are not the worst at doing that. I mean, even if anything, the only really hardcore psychological manipulation based on research that I'm aware of is slot machines, right? So the return is calculated to sort of be in the sweet spot of how much positive reinforcement we need to reinforce the behavior. That is actually based on psychological research, right? If it took too long between wins, you would stop, right? If it was too much, you'd make too much money. So they just hit the sweet spot. So there's that kind of research going on for everything. Just every product that you interact with has been researched and marketed to manipulate you. That's just the way it is.
Absolutely. I think, and this is something that is more of my opinion rather than fact at this point, but I work in software development, and the specific software I work in is based around the gambling industry. So I see a lot of the similarities in the trends for microtransactions and loot boxes leaning towards those slot machines mechanics. The probabilities are set at levels that are enticing and just close enough to keep you purchasing. But as legislated gambling operators, we are required to take actions to view, okay, so this person's been playing this much amount over this amount of time, and suddenly they've spiked up. What is the reasons for that? Can they actually afford that money? And we have to take proactive actions to ensure the safety of everyone playing on our platforms. And I think if the trends in video games carry on this way, then maybe the only argument I would have is that maybe these kind of controls need to be put in place for things that act like gambling. But yeah, they apply to, we know they work in the gambling industry. We know that they reduce harm. So if we could introduce them into the development world, then that could be a great thing too. So we can't have a conversation about video games and the harm it does to society without it coming to the gun debate. So we're going to touch on that one briefly. So I've got a quote for everyone. I've got a quote from President Trump himself following the Parkland shooting tragedy this year. So he said, "I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping people's thoughts." So next year it will be the anniversary of Columbine. We are nearly 20 years past Columbine. There have been, I've done some research on this topic myself, and I've seen more than 20 studies into links between violence and video games. And the evidence, to me, as a layman, seems so weak where there is any. So is that your understanding as well?
Well, I think one of the things that I always talk about whenever I'm doing my crusade to convince parents that, you know, your children are not going to turn into mass shooters, is, you know, which I always think, do you not have more faith in your children and your parenting? But that's fine. Is that studies have conclusively shown that being a gamer, playing video games, actually makes you less impulsive. It makes you better at controlling your emotions. It makes you better at pulling back your behavior when you get close to an emotional edge, because you have to in games. I mean, I don't know if I'm a good example of that. I do rage out quite a lot, but in general, it supposedly does make you much less impulsive, which would suggest that you are less likely to grab a gun and commit, you know, a mass shooting. It also has been shown that young people, I think it was in Holland, they were tested to see if they could feel less depressed, less hostile after a really frustrating incident if they were a gamer. And they did. It actually meant that gamers were better at managing their emotions. And whether that's because you go through them a lot whenever you die in a game, or you lose to somebody, or in particularly difficult multiplayer, you know, there's lots of, you know, suggestions as to why, but it has been conclusively shown that it does make you less impulsive, it does make you more able to control your emotions, which would strongly kind of suggest that these are not the people who are grabbing a gun and shooting up a school because people were not very nice to them, or, you know, because they had a bad day. And yet this is something that is perpetuated despite the fact that there are studies to suggest otherwise. And for me, I think one of the things that's most difficult is that as an industry, I think we're not very good at publicizing these studies. So lots of people that I talk to, even within the industry, have never heard of these studies. They didn't know they were a thing. They didn't realize that we have positive studies out there that show the real life benefits of gaming. And there are just so many. I mean, some really ridiculous ones, like, did you know gaming can cure a lazy eye? That was a study. But, and so I think we need to do a better job of getting those out there, because, you know, whenever there's a study about gaming and violence, we hear about it at the start. You know, whether it's the Supreme Court looked into it, the Australian government looked into it recently, it's, you know, we hear it at the beginning, and so that, again, for people, reinforces, oh, there's a link. Scientists are having to look into it. It's so serious that... But then we never hear the results. No one ever comes back and says, oh, by the way, they said no, actually. They said it's fine, your kids are good. Like, we never hear that. We never hear, it can cure a lazy eye, guys, or, you know, it's going to make you less impulsive. It's going to make you better able at controlling your emotions. And so I think we need to do a better job as an industry of getting out there and sharing that news, having press releases sent out, having games companies, and of course they'll always sound biased, but look into their own games, see what the positive effects of their games are, and making sure they publicise that, because we are not doing a very good job at telling people not only a game's not bad, they're good for your kids. They can do good things for your children. They can do good things for you as adults. And so we need to do a much better job of telling people that.
I mean, anecdotally speaking, my 8-year-old has the reading age of a sort of 10, 12-year-old, probably just through Pokemon, which is much the same way I grew up, actually. But yeah, I think it's not just the industry, but everyone. We know science communication is hard. That's why we're in jobs. But everyone has a duty as interested people, as people who love science, to get out there and talk about this stuff. When there's someone having that topic saying, oh, my kid really has this thing about Fortnite, maybe we could just say, hey, have you tried the parental controls?
Right.
And actually, do you know Fortnite's really good for teaching people like strategy and team building and all of those things as well. So there's no evidence that video games causes increased aggression. So why can't we move past this discourse?
Well, so yeah, the largest body of research with video games is looking for correlations between violence and playing violent video games. There's a lot of problems with the research. The first problem is that they don't really know how to operationally define violent. Like, what does it mean for somebody to be aggressive or to be violent, right? And it's not always they went out and killed somebody, right? That outcome is so unlikely for any individual video game player that you couldn't really get data on that. So they try to always come up with some proxy of how to measure how aggressive people are. So there's an issue there. But if you even that aside, if you just look at what does the data show, it's mixed. So you have some studies which show there is a correlation, some studies which show there isn't a correlation. But there isn't a consistent correlation. And the correlations that are found are very small, right? So the effect size is really the big thing. So when I'm looking at any question in the literature, like does A correlate with B, whatever it is, you want to look at a few things. How consistent is the correlation and what's the signal-to-noise ratio, right? How big is the effect size itself? It's easy to get statistically significant effects, if you're going to look for really tiny effects. But we want to see not only is it significant, it's also the effect size itself is big enough to be meaningful in whatever context you're in. So even the studies which show that there is a correlation, the effect is really tiny. So after 30 years of doing this research, and this goes back, way before Clinton, this goes back to the early 80s, the politicians, at least American politicians, raising the alarms about the video game violence, making our kids violent. It started when I was actually a kid. But in all that, in 30 years of research, they haven't been able to show a consistent effect. So yes, there are studies which show something and those that don't, but that pattern usually means there really isn't anything there. And even at the worst, even if there is something there, it's too small to worry about because you can't really see it consistently in the data. And it's all correlational. The research does not establish cause and effect. And it's just as plausible, if not more plausible, to argue that violent people like to play violent video games, right? Then violent video games make people violent. So there's no data showing a causal relationship between playing video games that are violent and any kind of adverse behavior. So I think this would be the point at which I think reasonable people could say, all right, it's been researched, that there is nothing there. It's just not something we need to worry about.
I think just generally as well, the most recent research report by UKI, which is the UK Interactive Entertainment Body, found that 99% of children play video games regularly. 99% of children. And yet, in the last 20 years, we have seen a pretty sizable decline in violence from children. So that alone, even if we're going to do terrible science and we're going to just wildly, correlate two things, that alone would suggest that if all children play video games, and yet we're seeing a drop in violence from children, that they're not doing a lot of harm.
And so the societal level experiment really, the worst fears have not manifested. My solution was just to play video games with my children. Seriously, my daughter was playing World of Warcraft at 4 years old.
Horde or Alliance?
That's that?
Horde or Alliance?
Both.
Okay, about half right there.
It's about to get a bit contentious on this panel.
And then you learn, because they're going to play, right? Your solution can't be, I'm going to keep my kids from playing video games. Good luck with that. It's not going to happen. Especially now that they're going to get them on their iPhones. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way you can keep them from accessing social media, accessing the internet, playing video games. So you have to just make it part of their life and be involved enough that you say, play responsibly, right? Do your homework first, and you reward yourself by sitting down and playing the video game. Or we'll play together for a little bit of time, and then you go on and do something else. And then it just becomes like anything. It just becomes a responsible part of your life.
Yeah, that's absolutely great. I think myself.
Sorry, I think that touches on really everything that moves forward in technology-wise. There's always something that creates a moral panic, and it's usually aimed at the sort of the youth and teenage years. Whether it was, video games are the latest evil out there. Previous to that, it was, rock and roll. It was, in the 80s, it was Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know how many people in the room have played Dungeons and Dragons. How many Satanists do we have in the room? Okay, what? Yes, thank you. One or two. Okay, thanks for throwing my point. Previous to that, rock and roll, it was jazz music. It was the pulp novels in the 20s. If you go back far enough, was it Plato who said that there was the youth of today are lazy. They have no respect for authority, and they're being corrupted by the latest social ills. There will always be something that's going to set the world off, and there'll be the outrage people who will say, that's the source of the latest ills of our youth generation. I'm greatly looking forward to finding out what I'm complaining about in 20 or 30 years and saying that, that's what's caused this. That's the big problem. I think the reality is there will always be something as long as, we take this measured approach and as Al says, we've got to champion the science that's made out there and say, look, these studies are proving that these things aren't the great ill. And as long as we keep doing that, and as Lauren says, science communication is never easy. It's really difficult. And as an industry, from our side, we absolutely need to champion that. But just as a general thing, we need to be out there saying, look, you know, the science proves otherwise. And the reality is, throughout history, we've always hit these certain topics that's the subject of a moral panic. And that's the crux of it, is finding these and just going, no, I'm fairly certain that, you know, pulp novels or jazz and rock and roll has not caused me to, you know, go murderous for ages or increase my aggression or corrupt society as a whole.
I have a quote, if anyone's interested. Now, this is a person from the 1860s talking about novels. So it's the 18th century, so sorry, 1760s. I got that one wrong. That's all right, we're not recording this or anything. So women of every age, of every condition, contract and retain a taste for novels. The depravity is universal. My sight is everywhere offended by these foolish yet dangerous books. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that the books that these people are talking about are Gothic novels, so things like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Anyone else study that in school? So as far back as the 18th century, people are talking about how the next big thing is ruining society. As Ash touched upon, like in the 1930s, it was cinema, it's been D&D, it's been comics and music and all of that kind of stuff. So all of the fun stuff that we're all enjoying, but life would be horrible without it. So are video games just the latest moral panic, do we think? Has anyone got anything else?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I love that quote. And I also love the idea of Plato as well, because he said plays and poetry. He said they were ruining children, which is just my favourite thing. And I think absolutely proves the point that there is always a moral panic. And it's always with things, as you said, fun, engaging things that perhaps, you know, the older generation don't get and they're a little bit frightened of. And believe me, when I see children play Fortnite, I'm like, I think there's witchcraft in the novels. They're very good. I'm not that good. But, you know, it's just a little bit frightening. It's something that people get really passionate about. I mean, you know, for the Horde, like, you know, base their whole lives around. So it is something that, you know, people, if you're not part of it, it's something that seems kind of a little bit terrifyingly engaging. I understand that parents who don't play games, who didn't grow up with computers the way that we did, see their child looking at an online world, pretending to be another person, possibly shooting people in the face, and they just think, well, this can't be good. And I completely understand that. But at the end of the day, as I said, you know, we have all these studies that say there are wonderful things that come out of games. And you know, for me, they've had such a positive influence on my life. And that's why I'm so desperate to do events like this, although I'm kind of preaching to the converted here. But in general, when you're on BBC Breakfast, you are not. Like, I got some very fun emails from people after that telling me why I was the cause of their children's corruption. But it's, you know, they are this positive influence. They've been shown that if you play games, you're more likely to be active and social, and you're more likely to be civic-minded, which is one of my favorite things. It's, you know, completely goes against this image that we have. And so I completely understand the moral panic, and that's why I never want to be too judgmental. I'm always trying to be very realistic when I get asked for the millionth time, so video games, you know, they're going to make my child violent. I'm always like, okay, let me give you some studies to look at. Here's some, you know, research that you can go and look at, because, you know, I understand that from the outside, if you don't play games, they do seem a little bit frightening. They do seem like they completely bewitch people, which is multiplied in terms of terror when you're watching it happen to your children. But I think, you know, your idea of playing with your children is fantastic. And, you know, that's something that we need to see more. I think you might know Stacey Solomon. She is a panelist on Loose Women. And which came to my attention recently because she had previously spoken out saying that she didn't like her children playing video games. And then she played Fortnite with them. And now apparently she is a video game convert, and she went on TV to talk about it, which I thought was really fantastic. And that's exactly it. Try them out. You don't need to be terrified. Again, I'm probably preaching to the converted. If you're at a skeptics conference and you've come to a video game panel, I'm sure you're not like, these video games, what is she talking about? I'll give them a go. But in general, that's what I say to people. Just try them. go see if tomorrow you wake up in a murderous rage and you go into your work and kill everybody there. You probably won't. And so, and like I said, have more faith in your children, have more faith in your parenting. I grew up in a very strict household. I played games my whole life. They were very strict about when I couldn't play, the time restrictions, that I had to have my homework done. If you're a good parent, then, you shouldn't be worried about games doing something monstrous to your children. You should just have faith in yourself as a parent.
Excellent, great. So, we're sceptical. We have to look at all sides of the argument, right? So I'm going to be a bit controversial here. Gaming and gaming culture has its problems. There are antisocial behaviours that are unique to gaming: cyberbullying, trolling, griefing. There's an inherent problem with harassment and sexism inside either the industry or gaming culture itself. But there are great things that we've talked about. Like, where does it go right and where does it go wrong, really, is where I want to go. Because we can sit here and wax lyrical in a room full of people that agree with us about how great games are, but what's the other side of that, and what can we do to be better? For me, as a former pro, the thing that always improved my playing and my experience gaming myself, and I think most pros that you talk to will feel similarly, is I don't tilt. I don't get salty. I never throw the controller across the room. I'm having fun. If the other guy sucks and he's deliberately dying, that's okay. The next one, I'll win it. Put it to one side. If I'm really frustrated, I'll turn off the chat. I'll turn off my comms. Because there's nothing I can say in that situation that's going to make it any better. Just put it aside to one bit and take a break, go make a cup of tea, come back, and I'll gain that rank back. It'll be fine. Has anyone else got any ideas about what it is that we do as gamers, like tilting or whatever, that's good or bad?
I mean, I'm not going to say I don't tilt. I'm not going to sit up here and lie to you people. I definitely do, but yeah, it is about remembering that you are having fun. And yeah, gaming is not the most perfect industry. I'm a black woman who used to be like a pro gamer and now, reports on gaming. So yeah, I definitely feel the force of it's not always the most welcoming community. It's not always the most inclusive community. And it isn't one that I would just set my kids free in completely, unfettered and unsupervised, because there are some really horrible people out there who say some really terrible things. I presented a show about a weekly esports tournament, and we've literally just had to kick a team out for trying to surreptitiously spell out the N-word during games. And I was like, guys, please. So it is, I'm not going to say there are not terrible people in gaming, as there are in everything, But we do have an issue. We do have an issue with trolling. We do have an issue with harassment. We do have an issue with swatting, which is just a real nightmare of a new thing. If you don't know what it is calling the police to somebody's address and erroneously reporting that they are trying to kill their family or that they have a bomb. And we have actually had 2 deaths so far where police have turned up and shot the person inside the house, believing it to be true. So it's very, very stressful. It is very, very scary. It happens to streamers a lot. And so I do think that we need to be stricter as a community on those people. I think what we've done before is really distance ourselves from them and be like, these people are not gamers, this is not gaming. And actually, they are a huge part, to the point where popular streamers now have to ring and register with their local police to say, if you get a SWAT call about my address, it will not be real, please ring this private number and check with me first that I'm not killing my family. Although, why would you admit that? You probably wouldn't. It might be an excuse to set it up. But in general, I think we need to do a better job of actually coming out and condemning these things rather than distancing ourselves. And I have totally been somebody who's done that. I have gone and said, do you know what, these people don't represent us. This is not who we are. The people spelling out N-word, that's not who we are. The swatters, that's not who we are. But at the end of the day, they are part of our community, and they are quite a big part, and they are having a significant impact. And so I think it's about not necessarily taking responsibility, because I do not feel a responsibility for those people, but saying, okay, do you know what, let's start helping people with that. Let's start looking at some strategies, let's start, if people are streamers, having resources for them to go and learn how they prevent this kind of behavior, how they deal with harassment, so that they've got, support, rather than what happened before where people just said, oh, that's terrible, well, I would never do that. And then you're left struggling with it by yourself. So yeah, I think it is about just stepping forwards and saying, okay, how do we deal with this, rather than saying, well, this isn't something I would do, so therefore it's not a gaming issue.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything unique about gaming. I mean, all the things you mentioned, have their forms in other social interactions, like social media in general. We have an issue with various forms of trolling. It's just that some people are assholes, right? and you're going to encounter them in any place, and this is a place where lots of people can get together online. There is there's a layer of anonymity when you're playing online, just like any social media. You can have a pseudonym, and that, I think, gives people the freedom to be more of a jerk, So, and I also find it interesting, like the game I'm playing with my daughters now is Overwatch, which is really fun. And, just like in any walk of life, most people are fine, some people are assholes, and you just can ignore them or just ban them or turn them off or whatever. And I always think, because you have no idea how old the people are that you're playing with. So I'm a 54-year-old guy. I could be interacting with somebody who's 11, and sometimes they act like it, which is an insult to 11-year-olds. But that's, I think, that's the only real new layer here, is that it's the technology allows for you to be somebody else online in a way, and so I think that has an effect on people's behavior. But at the same time, the technology gives us opportunities to police ourselves as a community, right? So in a positive way. It doesn't have to be oppressive. It just you can create standards of behavior and to explore ways to do that, right? So that there isn't, because we know, yes, there's a lot of sexism and racism and stuff like that, because that's just a reflection of society. It's not produced by the gaming. I don't think it's definitely not unique to the gaming culture. I think it's just that it's coming out in that culture like everywhere else.
Ash, do you think there's more that developers need to do to recognize where their platforms are being used for these kind of things?
I think it's really important for games developers to empower the player, and whether, as we've said there, is really good and really important to have those features to be able to turn off the chat, be able to experience it without that side of the interaction. I just realized that as a talk on video games and aggression, I'm going to be the third person on the panel to admit to tilting in video games. So that's probably not the best advert for whether or not they cause aggression. I'll let you answer whether or not you're the same.
I don't think Dark Souls counts. No, just for the record.
Yeah, I'm not going to mention how many controllers I've gone through on that game. But I think that's the important thing. The reality is, with any of this internet and social media, you need to have that ability to restrict what's coming in. For a lot of, as you say, streamers who are facing swatting, which is just a frightening thought that somebody is going to find out where you live, call the police and tell them that you're a danger to somebody so that they come and kick your door in. That's just terrifying. I've seen a lot of streamers these days who don't show their face, they don't give any information about themselves. It's just the gameplay, because it does protect them. And then they have moderators who are dealing with the chat because, well, let's be honest, yeah, as I say, people are assholes, and they're going to be assholes to these people because they think, like they will when they watch anybody on television that they have, or they listen to the radio, they've got a personal connection with that person, that they've built up a relationship with them just through that one-sided viewing. So I think when it comes to the industry, yeah, we have to empower the users themselves to be able to say, I don't want the chat, I want to be able to mute those people, I want to never see them again, which is a new feature that a lot of games have been putting in, which is the ability to say, I've played against that person was really horrible to me, whether they were griefing me or they were intentionally killing me in the game, or they were just saying things to me. I never want to be matched with them again so that I won't see that. And I think coming up with systems that do separate the player base in those ways is to subtly steer away people who are going to be like that against people who just want to enjoy the game, as 99% of players do. I think that's the way we need to look at it.
In real life, there are consequences if you're an asshole, right? But in an anonymous game, there isn't, unless you build it into the system. But once you build in the consequences for being an asshole, that will kind of take care of itself, I think, right?
Yeah, and I think we've seen a lot of that where certain games have taken the approach that people who do grief or they're cheating get pushed into servers with the other people who grief or cheat. And so people using hacks and that end up playing just against each other. Perfect. Everybody else will continue to enjoy that game, and then everybody else, those people will be sat together. Another great feature, I think it was one of the latest Rainbow Six games. They've actually it doesn't matter where in the world this person's been banned from the game, it will pop up while you're playing saying so-and-so has been banned. You may never have played against that person, you may never have seen them in it, they may be around the world from you, but it's a subconscious trick to say there are consequences for this behavior. And so everybody, just in the back of your mind, you're going, oh, maybe I shouldn't rage down the microphone at this person or cheat or however it is that you may get banned from those because you're seeing it actually happen in real time. There's somebody getting kicked away. And it's those reinforcement of consequences is just as important as I think positive reinforcement that we use as a psychological trick to get people to play more in the video game.
I think as well, one of my favourite things about Rainbow Six is that they're being fantastic for harassment. So if you use a racial slur, if you use any of their forbidden words once, you get instant ban from the game, which you should have seen people on Twitter complaining about that. They were like, oh, I said the N-word once. Like, how dare you? They were very upset. But actually, you briefly mentioned positive reinforcement, and this is one of my favourite things in Overwatch. So Overwatch is actually, I'm sure you found as well, quite a positive game. It is one of the kind of games with the lowest levels of harassment, but it is still quite toxic, particularly if you play at the higher levels or if you play in the competitive rankings, where I definitely don't get tilted when I'm playing my competitive placements in that. And in that, what they did was they tried loads and loads of different things to punish people, and it just didn't matter. They would set up new accounts, they would figure out ways to get back into the game, they would continue being awful. So what they did was created a system called endorsements. And so at the end of the game, you get 3 different options, and you can endorse players in your team if they did something good. So you can say they were sportsmanlike, or they were a really good team leader, and they helped us figure out what to do, or they just played really well, or that kind of thing. And you also get a little benefit. So if you are given an endorsement, you get an XP. And so that, for them, has dropped their harassment something like 40%. It has absolutely changed the community. And as somebody who plays regularly, maybe too much, it is, which I shouldn't admit here, should I? a normal amount. It has, for me, I think, really, really changed the game. I used to be somebody that played, because I like to play competitively, and it was horrible. The people were horrible. And so it's, it has fundamentally changed it because, as you said, people are arseholes, right? They're always going to be, that's just who some people are. And so instead of punishing them and then them having to figure out a way to come back because that's just their nature and they're always going to be awful, it's forcing them to be nice. Because if they don't, they're at a disadvantage in the game. And that's what I love, is that they said, you can be an absolute twat if you want, like that's fine. But other people will get points for being nice and you will fall behind them. You won't earn loot boxes as fast. You won't level up as fast. And they were like, damn, I've got to be nice now. I've got to be supportive in game and make helpful suggestions because that's, what they had to do. And so I had not thought of that before. And I thought, for me, that's fantastic. Instead of saying, stop being horrible, which some people can't do, they were like, well, you know what? You're going to get rewards for being nice. And so even if you're a horrible person, you're going to have to pretend to be lovely. And it has made the game a lot more enjoyable.
It's not really a fundamental difference between pretending to be nice and actually being nice at the end of the day.
It feels the same, so yeah.
Exactly. I think the only other thing I would say on that topic is we've got, as everywhere in QED, we've got a pretty good representation in the room. But if you are a person who is in a position of privilege and you see someone being harassed or being called out or anything like that, I've had it myself. And anyone stepping in and defending that person or even just sending them a little whisper to say, hey, that's not cool, I hope you're okay, makes the world of difference. Everyone on the other end of that keyboard is a person. And as gamers, just reaching out to people and saying, hey, that was a great game, I loved your mercy, or, nice save on the clutch or whatever, just will utterly change. We all know, utterly changes your day. I think if take away anything, take away that from me. Okay, so we're nearly time for questions, but I just wanted to touch on one last thing very quickly, which is future technologies. So VR is a big thing. By the way, VR, just over there, if anyone hasn't signed up already, just thought we'd plug it a bit. Is VR going to change things? Is there any reason that a 3D realistic world where you feel like you are in it is going to be any more influential than sitting at your keyboards?
No. I don't think so. I've been playing VR for almost a year, and I love it. It's great. I mean, the experience is really compelling. For some things, it's not as good for other things. It's a little bit more exhausting, so you actually spend less time playing if you're doing only VR, because you're physically up and moving around, and it's a little bit more immersive. So I find that I spend fewer hours total if I'm playing a lot of VR. But it's, in terms of all the things that we're talking about, I don't see how there would be any effect. It's just a little bit more physically more immersive,
Okay. You see a lot of, I've seen a lot of studies about how VR is starting to be used for kind of mental health and PTSD. Do you think it can be something that could really benefit us as?
Yes, I mean, the real difference between looking at a screen and playing VR is that the VR tricks your brain into thinking that you're in the physical space and that the movement is real. That's why it causes such vertigo. If your avatar is moving through the world and you're not, that disconnect between what you're seeing and what you're sensing causes motion, like the worst motion sickness you've ever experienced. Because it works, because the VR, they pass the threshold where your brain buys it, and then the illusion is complete, and you're in a virtual world. But that's different than on the screen, so it's crossed that threshold. So that also means that there's applications that will work for that. And so the one that is already in effect, that is being used already, is for people with phobias. Let's say you have a phobia of spiders. You could be in a virtual location with virtual spiders, and that could incrementally increase your exposure, right? So that's exposure therapy. Exposure therapy is old, but now you can have virtual exposure therapy, and it works just fine because your brain is buying it enough that it's the same effect as if you were actually being exposed to spiders or heights or whatever. So it's a really good tool, and that was just the low-hanging fruit. I'm sure it'll have other applications like that as well.
That's great, brilliant. I'm really looking forward to that kind of thing. So we are nearly out of time. So I have this blue thing. I'm told it's a microphone. So how this works is I'm going to throw it out, and hopefully someone will catch it. If you don't, it's not my fault. And you have to talk into the black bit. Okay, so if anyone wants to put a hand up, I've got one over there. Right. Wish me luck. Hey!
Hello. Oh, so don't you think it could, you were talking about nothing's new about video games. It could be just the latest in a long chain of things to be worried about: novels, video nasties, rock and roll, jazz. Isn't there a difference, though? Because novels didn't, if there was a thing in the novel in the 18th century that went, page 67, 80% of readers have stopped. So let's change page 67. Video games, with the online development, have this constant stream of data from players, constantly improving it to keep you playing. That isn't what they want. Movies want everybody to watch it. If there was a novel that could somehow magically keep expanding until everybody got fed up with it, that's what would happen. So video games do have this kind of new way of keeping people playing, as a parent, my worry with video games is that they're just good. I can't argue with my kids and say, turn it off, it's rubbish, because it's amazing. I said, and I can't play with my 14 because I'm shit at it. And they kick my ass. Even GoldenEye, the N64, I thought, I'll take you at this, and they took me to the cleaners within a day or so. So, I am a little bit worried about video games just because they're so good, and the only downside, I guess, you could say, well, so what? It's just the new thing, and it's cool, and deal with it. But the balance, they go out less, they read less, they watch less movies, they listen to less music, even bad music. They listen. It's Fortnite, Overwatch, and sure, the parental controls are there. I don't know how they work. But if you do put on the parental controls, other parents, if you're not in a committee of parents all doing it, then you're the Nazi and unpopular. So my question, I guess, is, isn't it a bit different to video games and to video nasties or the other panics?
It's interesting. Now, I am the Nazi, I'll be honest. So my 8-year-old often laments to me that all his friends play Fortnite and he's not allowed. But I feel quite strongly that children need to reach a certain level of maturity before they're ready to interact with the online world. When I talk to, the interesting thing as a parent is when I talk to other parents, their kids aren't allowed to play. their kids will tell my kids they're allowed to play. Their kids will tell my kids they're allowed to play for 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever. So it's having a bit of skepticism about the social pressures that your kids are under. And I think for me, recognizing that even if, maybe you can't play video games, but your kids will all recognize the time that you can spend with them. Go out to park and play footy, or find something together that you can do, and it will never compete with video game. It will always be so much better to spend time with your dads than it will be to spend time on video games.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics changed their recommendation for parents for screen time for kids, and it was rather than telling them to limit their screen time, it's rather make sure you're spending at least this much time doing other stuff, right? Being physically active or being outside or whatever. So switching it to the positive, spend time doing good stuff. Don't frame it as a negative. Limit your time doing the thing you want to do. And that seems to work better.
I think Fortnite is one of those weird things at the moment. It has been a bit of a shocking cultural phenomenon. Nobody really expected that game to be as big as it has been as a free-to-play game. It's huge for that company. They could probably just sit back right now and just live off Fortnite. It's making them that much money, and there's that many people playing it. I think it's always going to be one of those ones where it might be a bit of an outlier. And yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of parents right now who probably know the dances from Fortnite, and their kids just talk about it constantly. There will be something else that will come along, and that will be the next big thing. I think.
It'll pass, like everything.
Yeah. As everything does.
Give it 6 months and nobody will care, realistically.
With any luck, it'd be my game.
Sorry, I just want to get in a couple more questions because I know there's loads of people and we're already over on time. I'm sorry.
Hi there. So with things like the lack of action on things like climate change and what I feel is like a lack of embracing critical thinking around the world in like politics, just curious as to what the moral panics were when those decision makers were children and maybe they were right.
Sorry, I didn't catch that one.
So things, I feel like, I don't want to get into like intergenerational disagreements here, but I feel like the generation above me that make a lot of decisions about things like climate change and things like right-wing policies and inequality, things like in Italy, they're stopping migrants coming in by boat. It's pretty severe. When those decision makers were children, what was the moral panic? And maybe they were right.
I can answer that, being of the same age.
Oh, brilliant. You make my job easy.
Get your nose out of that book. That's what I was told, again, in the 60s, again and again and again. So, yeah.
Yeah, in the 50s and the 60s, it was comic books, wasn't it?
Yeah. As I've got this, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
It's slightly facile, but it was probably over 20 years ago that I first handed the controller to my son and said, "This is a difficult bit, can you get me over it, please?" And he now plays on a much higher level than I do. And he's a much better driver than I am. Is there any evidence to show there's a genuine link in that?
Yeah, there is. So not very many things translate in terms of like learning one skill helps you with other skills. They usually don't. But the one exception to that is sort of the visual spatial skills you develop in gaming do seem to translate outside the game. That evidence is still preliminary, but that seems to be the one exception to the general rule that skills do not translate. In fact, some of the studies have been done with surgeons, especially those who do the endoscopic surgery, where they're basically operating through a camera. And they have better outcomes if they play a video game. Because the skills are similar enough that they get used to operating in the virtual world, for example. So, yeah, visual spatially, there does seem to be a benefit to playing video games.
And Formula One is actually investing a lot of money in video game simulations for their drivers to train them and make them, and they've shown really impressive results that they do actually do better if they played the course in a video game first. So Formula One and Renault both trying that out.
Yeah, because optimizing that learning curve, it actually is a good way to learn. It actually is optimal.
Right. We are over time. I'm so sorry for everyone who's got questions. I will certainly be around afterwards for a bit. Please come and harass me. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you very much. If we can just give a round of applause to everyone on our panel. Thank you very much and enjoy. Enjoy QED.